So welcome everyone to a full demonstration of the startup of FlockBase software. My name is Ryan. I'm in charge of support at FlockBase. I'm going to be taking about an hour right now to show you what you can do to start in FlockBase, just from the very first welcome email all the way through getting some reports out there. We're going to have people moderating the chat, so if you want to drop any questions there, feel free to do so, and they'll be happy to answer if it's a little bit shorter. If it's a longer question, or I feel it's more appropriate to answer kind of in a group setting or to do that on video, we'll save that for the end, and for the last 15 to 20 minutes we're going to go through and answer those. So as you can see right here, we've got just the initial registration screen. What I did is I went to flockbase.com, I clicked the orange button to start a free trial, I put in an email, and as soon as I hit go there, it sent me an email to register, and so I clicked the registration link in there, and that takes me to this screen. So for first name, I'm going to put my first name, last name, just going to put demonstration for now. Picked a username, just demonstration Ryan, keep it simple. And then the organization name is demonstration organization. When you put these things in there, it shows that on the technician panel for us. So if we need to go in and find your information for us to assist you online, it's helpful to be able to find you by organization name. A lot of people do leave that blank, but if you put that in there, it is helpful. So let's go ahead and get started with just the starter data. If you want, if you're just doing a trial, you can do sample data, and we can clear that out for you at any time later, and you can start from there. Or if you want just the starter data, I'll show you how to build that into a normal functioning database. So let's accept the terms and conditions and sign up. On the first screen here, we've got is the dashboard. It tells me that I'm in trial mode, and I can create my first household or purchase now. You can click Purchase Now at any point during this. I would like you to know that for the trial, it is the full version of FlockBase. You're not missing out on anything other than potential payment integration. You can't sign up for potential payment integration until you've already made a purchase, but other than that, you can do everything in the trial version that you can do in the full version of the Plus plan. The first thing for us to set up, just so that we can start getting contributions added, is funds. So we're going to get our chart of accounts set up first, and I'm just going to do a basic chart of accounts, but the first thing we need to set up is funds. We can do that on the left by going to Settings, and then Financial, and then down to Funds. As you can see here, there are a few that you just start with de facto. You might not need these. You will possibly not need the Building, Missions, or Benevolence Fund, but most churches do. They might need to rename it, in which case we can change our benevolence fund down here. All we need to do is click at the end of the word benevolence, hit backspace, and we can just change that to the giving fund. Now on here, everything will render as all caps, but it is case sensitive, so when we print reports with this, it'll have upper and lower case. It asks for a fund number in this. Normally what we do is 300 or 3000 level are equity. And funds are all equity accounts, so we give them a number that's 1-300. The 1 designates which fund it is, and the 300 designates what type of account it is. So then the building, we have 2-300, missions, 3-300, and giving, we'll have 4-300. And let's add a new one. So when we add a new fund, we have two options here at the bottom. One is to automatically create income and expense accounts when we create this fund. And the second is to create a contribution purpose. For every fund, we need at least one income and at least one expense account connected to that fund, because income and expense accounts are the way that we get money into and out of funds. So for example, we're going to have a separate fund, and we're going to name it the Mission Trip Fund. So this is a little bit different from the Missions Fund, where we give to missionaries or international efforts. This is going to be a mission trip for just either our youth or maybe our college trip, or maybe some adults going on a mission trip. We want to set those funds aside so that they don't get used on just general church expenses. When we create this fund, we're going to need income accounts, so when people make payments for the mission trip, we can bring in that money into this fund. And then contribution purpose, when people make contributions towards this, that'll be available on our list of contribution purposes. So once we've got that information in, just click OK, and we'll see a new fund right here, and it automatically adds fund to the end of that name. And we're going to name it, or we're going to number it 5-300. So now we've got 5 funds in here, and we can go ahead and go to our chart of accounts. We can go to Settings, Financial again, and then Accounts. And in here, you'll have a full list of accounts. Up at the top, we've got First National Checking, First National Savings. Those are both cash/bank accounts. Cash bank accounts are just assets, and they're your actual bank accounts, so you'll have a register for them. When you make payments or when you make deposits, you record them as going into or out of that bank account. So we've got 3 here, just from the get-go. You can rename these to just checking and just savings. And you can also assign these any number that you so choose. The numbering system that we have just in place and that we normally recommend is 1,000 level for assets. And so cash bank accounts are all assets. So these are named 1010, 1020, and 1030. Now you'll notice that it's just the number here. There's not a 1-1010 because any bank account is not necessarily connected to a fund. And then down here we've got 2,000 level. Those are going to be liabilities. We already did the 3,000 level. Those are all equity accounts, which in FlockBase are funds. And then we've got income accounts right here. Now you see the first income account that we have with a number is tithes and offerings. It's an income account. It's number 1, designating that it's to the general fund, dash 4,010. So this could be 1-4,000. We just name it 1-4010 so that you'll know in sequence which of these is going to go first on a profit and loss report later. So our new account, Mission Trip Income, that was created automatically when we created the Mission Trip Fund, we're going to need to number it 5 to designate that it connects to the Mission Trip Fund, dash 4010, just to show that it's the first income account that's connected to that fund. And every fund is probably just going to have 1 income account. You might have 2 if you want to split up Sunday school offering compared to normal tithes and offerings, but it's not necessary. All you really need to know is income through this account goes into this fund. Whereas for expense accounts, you'll need at least one connected to every fund. But you'll probably have more than that, and you'll definitely have more than that for the general fund. Our general fund isn't a fund necessarily like the rest of them, because all it means is that's the money that the church has that the church can spend on anything that it likes. So any money that you have that's not designated, so whether that's income from a bake sale, whether that's contributions, whether it's rent income, all that is going to be general fund if no giver has designated it to be for a particular purpose. So everything that the church spends, for example, on curriculum, on office supplies, pastor salary, etc., that's all going to take money out of the general fund when you spend it. And then in the right-hand column here, we've got departments. All departments are groups of expense accounts. So when we go to print a report later, a profit and loss report that shows how much money a church has taken in and how much money a church has spent during a given time period, this is going to be how things are grouped. So first grouping is by fund. So every expense account, and we'll see the curriculum, office supplies, pastor salary, housing, staff salaries, etc., they're all connected right here to the general fund. Separately, they're broken down by department. So for example, curriculum goes in the ministry department. So when we look at that report, we're going to see which expenses we have that are connected to the general fund, and then further broken down which of those belong to a particular type of expense account. And that's just what a department is. So for example, pastor salary, personnel, pastor housing, personnel, support staff, that's all going to be grouped together as personnel so that it makes more sense on our report. So now we've got a couple funds in, we've got a couple accounts in. And now the last thing we're going to look at for just the initial setup is just going to be contribution purposes. Now if you'll remember, when we created a new fund, we had an option to automatically create a contribution purpose connected to that fund. The way that a purpose connects to a fund is that it's directly connected to an income account. Now, the reason that we have contribution purposes is just another layer of what we can tell people that they're giving towards. So, for example, the general offering purpose, when people give to that, their receipt is going to say, you gave to general, or you gave to general fund. It's not going to say, you gave to tithes and offerings account 1-4010. That's probably a little bit too granular. So this is just kind of another layer in between that. So what people see on their contribution letter makes more sense. You'll see two boxes here. One is going to be whether or not that purpose is tax deductible, and the vast majority of your purposes are. And the only things that you're going to have that are not tax deductible are things where people receive something in exchange for their contribution other than intangible religious benefits. That's how the IRS describes it. If you have any questions about that, we'll happily answer that by phone call or email during the week. And the second box that we have is whether or not this contribution is available online. This is not going to matter for the trial, but when this will start to matter is if you sign up for online payment integration. If you sign up for online payment integration, only the purposes that you designate as available online will show up as available for your online givers to use. So, for example, if we have a bunch of purposes, we have the mission trip purpose, and the mission trip's over, we can take that off of being available online as soon as it's over so people don't accidentally give to it when they go to give online. And as you can see, every one of these purposes is connected to an income account. If a purpose is not connected to an income account, when you go to create a contribution, it's going to give you an error that says the purpose is likely not mapped. If you receive that error, you can just go Settings, Financial, and then Purposes to see this Contribution Purpose Settings page, and you can make sure that every purpose is connected to an account. So now we've got some of that information in, and we've got funds, we've got a couple accounts, and we've got a couple purposes. Now the next thing that we're going to want to do if we're setting up to start doing accounting is we're going to need to get the beginning balances in there. The way that I like to do this is just go to accounting and then journal entries. You can also do this as a single deposit, but it's a little bit cleaner when you do it as a journal entry. The reason for that is if I have a starting balance in two different bank accounts, I can affect them both on the same entry instead of having a separate deposit for each one. So under journal entries, I'm going to click New, the green button in the top right. The date, I want to do this as of 12/31 of 2020. And the reason I want to do this as of last year is because I'm going to be using some income accounts on this entry. And if I use an income account on this entry and I do it as of 2021, it might throw off some of my income reports, such as my profit and loss report, for the year of 2021. I don't want to do that because we're not actually seeing income here. What we're doing is just establishing a fund balance. So I'm going to put it in last year just so that it doesn't affect this year. The number, I'm just going to put beginning balance entry. So the first account that we're going to select is the checking account. And let's just say that we need to put $100,000 in checking. Checking account is an asset, so we're going to debit it to raise its total. So we've got $100,000 in debits to the checking account to establish that balance. And let's also say that we have $20,000 in a savings account. So we've got $20,000 in savings. And just like the checking account, the savings account is an asset. So we're going to give it $20,000 in debits, and so now we've got a debit total of $120,000. But the entry can't stop there because FlockBase is all double entry. So every entry that you make has to have equal debits and equal credits in order to keep you in balance. So what we're going to do next is we're going to determine how much of that $120,000 belongs in the general fund, the building fund, missions, and benevolence fund. So first, we're going to do our designated funds. The reason for that is because whatever we have left over at the end is necessarily our general fund, because it's just the money that we have that's not spoken for by other designations. So we're going to go ahead and say we've got building income. We've got $40,000 in our building fund. So let's make a note there on the memo. 40,000 in building fund. And because a building fund is equity, it's on the right-hand side of a balance sheet, and so it carries a credit balance to offset against your assets. So we're going to go ahead over here, and we're going to put $40,000 into the building income account. And that's going to put $40,000 in our building fund. The second, we're going to go to our missions income account. So we're going to say that we have $30,000 in missions fund. And over here, again, that's a credit, $30,000 in the missions fund. And at this point, you might be thinking, well, what if we have a designated checking account for each of our designated funds? It doesn't necessarily have to be that case. In order to do that, all you're really looking for is for your balance sheet to balance. And so on the left-hand side, you've got your assets, and on the right-hand side, you have all of your liabilities and all of your equity. What really matters is that the total in all of your funds put together is equal to the total in all of your bank accounts put together. Excuse me. So you can just match these exactly. You can have just $100,000 in checking, $100,000 in the general fund, but that doesn't have to be the case. So it's totally fine for us to have 100,000 here, 40 if it's this, 30 if it's this, and all the rest of it, 50,000, can be general fund. But we're going to also add a balance to our benevolence fund. So we're going to go ahead and say that there's $25,000 in the benevolence fund. And so again, that's going to be over here under credit, $25,000. And as you've been seeing, every time I click into a credit box, the entry wants to balance. So it tells me that I've got $25,000 remaining to balance. So all I need to do in this last one is I can pick tithes and offerings because I know it's connected to the general fund. And I can just put remainder in general fund. And as soon as I click into this credit box, it's going to put that last $25,000 in there because it wants to balance. So as you can see, this one entry establishes the beginning balances of 2 bank accounts and 4 funds. And in the memo, we've got very clear notes that at this time we had this much money in each of these accounts. When we're done, we can click Save, and it'll allow it to save. Now, for example, if we've got it imbalanced, if we've got more debit than credit, the Save button is grayed out, and it won't let me save it until I'm in balance between debits and credits. So now that we've got it in there, let's go ahead and look at our first report. So all of your accounting reports are going to be under Accounting and then Reports. And I get questions about this a lot, whether or not there are other reports other than Profit and Loss. There are other reports here. The only thing is, when you go to Accounting and Reports, Profit and Loss is highlighted in green. However, all of these other type headers can be highlighted and open up new categories of reports. All you have to do is click on the word. So for our time frame, we're going to click this year, or we could do this week even. And let's look at our balance sheet. On our balance sheet, at the top we've got our assets, and in our assets right now, we've got $100,000 in the checking and $20,000 in the savings. So our total assets line up to $120,000. Liabilities, we currently have none. We didn't enter a mortgage or anything like that because all we're really concerned about is cash flow. And then at the bottom, we have our funds, which are equity. Down here, we've got $25,000 in the general fund, $40,000 in the building fund, $30,000 in missions, and $25,000 in the giving fund, which is what we renamed our benevolence fund just a little bit ago. So our total assets up here are $120,000. And our total equity, or our total fund balance down here, is $120,000. So we're perfectly in balance. That's why it's our balance sheet. And then we can go back, and there are some of the other reports. And so, for example, what I was just talking about, if we looked at last year, all of that beginning balance entry that we made, it'll affect that profit and loss. So on our profit and loss report, it shows that we had $25,000 in income to each of our funds, or 25,000 here, 40 here, 30, etc. On this profit and loss report, we can also, when we mouse over this, you'll see that it highlights in blue. Once we click that highlights in blue, I'll be able to see a ledger for that account to see every entry that's affected that income account during the time frame that I selected. So I've got a general ledger for that account for all of last year, and it just shows me that the $25,000 we were looking for is part of this beginning balance entry. We can even click this again to open up that entry that we made if we need to edit it. At that point, we can just click back and then back again to go back to our profit and loss report. So that's just a couple of our accounting reports that are available. We're going to come back to this in just a second, because the next thing that we're going to do is start doing some contributions. So the first thing that we needed to set up for that was our funds, and then income accounts, and then purposes. We've got that in, so in order to do contributions, we need people to make those contributions. So on the left-hand side, we can go to membership and then households. Also, if you go to the dashboard, it still gives you a prompt to create your first household as long as one does not yet exist. So we click it from there as well. And so in this household, we've got a little bit of information that we can provide about the family. So we can do a print name and a sort ID. All this means is that we've got one of these will print on a report. So we can do John and Jane Doe print on a report. And their sort ID is automatically John and Jane Doe as well. However, if we want to just sort internally by last name, comma first name, we can switch to that as well. So I'm going to click done right here and just show you how that looks under membership and then household. So we've got household ID, and this is where it sorts by default. We've got Doe, comma John and Jane, and their household name, John and Jane Doe. And we can also go back to that household to continue adding edits. Just on this screen, we can click the Actions button, or the View button in the Actions column. It's just this little right-facing triangle. So on here, all of the boxes are grayed out until I click Edit Household. And so I can add a home phone number, I can add email, and I can add a status. Right now, the only status that exists is active. To add more statuses, we can go on the left to Settings, and then Membership, and then Roles and Statuses. Here is where you can add some things. You've got, for example, roles that people play within their own household. And these are going to be applied to members of households. The ones existing by default are head of household, spouse, and son. We can also add, if I could spell it, we could add daughter, we could add aunt, uncle, etc. And as you can see, when I start typing in any of these blank lines, it populates that line, and it also provides a new one for me to start typing again. Under member statuses, the ones existing by default are active, inactive, or prospect, or we can rename that to prospective member. We can also change that, so you can say member or attending non-member. And your denomination probably has your own designations for what you want to call or what you want to assign as a status for an individual in this database. The reason that FlockBase has households and members is all that means is that households are households to which your church has some form of connection, whether they're regular attenders, whether they just visited. Your threshold for adding people to the database probably depends on your church, but FlockBase can really speak to all of that. And then separately, what member means here is not necessarily a full member of your church or your denomination. All member means is they're a member of a household to which you're connected. So in this database, all of the individuals are going to be called members whether or not they're a baptized member of your congregation. And then also, down here, as we were just looking at, we've got household statuses. You can determine whether a household is active or inactive, or you can break it down further with things like moved away or something of that nature. And again, all you have to do is start typing here, and then a new line appears. If you want to remove any of these statuses that no member or household has, all you need to do is click this red X next to that line. So let's go back and continue editing the John and Jane Doe household. So again, just back to membership and then households, and I can either click on their name or click on this view button in the actions column. So we can assign them those statuses now. So we're going to leave them as active. If we have any notes about this family, we can leave those here. We can put their address in here, and these are going to be their mailing addresses. And then under advanced settings, you might have some members of your church or of your congregation who would like to be excluded from a directory if you print one, or they'd like to have their phone number not listed publicly if you do a phone directory. You can accommodate them under advanced settings and just edit that, and you can highlight those to exclude their phone number. As soon as you're done, just click Done. Also, you'll see household members over here. We're going to add those in just a second. And then we've also got groups. We're going to create groups in just a little bit, and we'll come back to this as well. The last category we've got for a household is dates. The one type of date existing by default for a household is wedding anniversary. We can assign February 14th of 1960 is when John and Jane Doe got married. Valentine's Day 1960. If you want to add more types of dates, again, that's under settings, membership, and then dates. So for member dates, the one that exists by default is birthday. We can also add in baptized or joined church, and we could also add that for the household. So we could add in the date they moved away, or any other date that might apply to a household. Just as before on the other screen, start typing in this white box, and a new line will appear as soon as that's populated. So we'll go back again to the John and Jane Doe household, and we can add in, obviously the date that they moved away doesn't apply to them, provided they're still an active member of the congregation, or an active part of the congregation. So now what we've got to do is we're going to add some members to this household. So we've got their household, and we're going to add each of them individually. We can do that here under household members and just click Add. In the top left, we're going to say John Doe, and we're going to list him as the head of household. Put his phone number. Some of this information is more pertinent to just an individual. So for example, a mobile phone number is going to apply to just a member or an individual and not to the household at large. You can also put an email address here, a work number and extension as appropriate. You can also add individual notes for just a member. And then we've got those member statuses we looked at earlier. We're going to say that John is a member